time started in July of '43. I was 17 and a half years old when I enlisted. And went to Sampson, New York, and Sampson down to Norfolk, waiting for a ship to go overseas. Our ship had already been picked. We were assigned to the USS Plunkett. And in Norfolk, we were just sitting there waiting for about 2 weeks. There was a terrific explosion. Now, at this period of time, I've only been in the Navy 2 months, and there was an explosion out at the air base. At where we were staying, Norfolk was right next to the dispensary, so they grabbed all of us as stretcher bearers, and it was a pretty messy sight to start off with. I've never seen anything like this. But we got through that. Went overseas on the USS Murak. They said, "You're assigned to Holystone the deck." Now, I never even knew what Holystone was, but it was a boutique deck, big supply ship, and they gave us a bucket of water and sand and a brick. And you put the water down, the sand down, and it's like sand in the deck. That's the way they did it in the old sailing days and what have you. And you hold us down the deck. Now, some people had chip and paint, some were scrubbing bulkheads. They didn't like, we were passionate on this supply ship, was the refrigerated supply ship. And it took us about 30 days to get across, so they didn't like us just sitting around doing anything. But it was nice. We went down to the Caribbean, across the Casablanca, and at least we were out where the sun was and what have you. And it wasn't that bad a duty. Met the Plunkett in Palermo, Sicily. That night, we returned back to Mirs El Kabir, Oran. Now, Mirs El Kabir is the French naval port at Oran. It's about 10 miles west of Oran. And it's a man-made port. It's a huge seawall that was put up to protect the harbor area. And you could tie up, we had 9 troop ships tied up there, plus we could tie 4 destroyers single, and then the destroyers always doubled up, double or triple when they tied up. But that's how large this man-made bulkhead was, or wall was. We stayed in there for about a week or so. Naples had been taken by this time, but it took them a while for the Navy to clear out the wreckage and debris that was in the harbor. And so then we started taking convoys from Naples, or from Oran up to Naples. The Mediterranean was bad for submarines. We had 9 troop ships that took up there, and we had 15 escorts. We had 13 destroyers and 2 DEs. Normally, when you take convoy across the ocean, you could take 100 ships and only have 15 escorts. But at this point, they didn't want anything to go wrong, and we never did have a mishap with them. We started making these runs up into Naples. The very first trip into Naples, Naples was quarantined because it was a typhoid epidemic. Because the water system was destroyed, the sewer system was destroyed, so there was nobody allowed ashore for liberty. So our ship happened to be the Commodore's ship, and he arranged for us to go into Capri. The island of Capri was already at that point, it's only been a month taken, that they've had the Air Corps had taken it over as far as their R&R facilities. But anyway, we went ashore there, and we took a group of us took a horse carriage ride around the island. Now, our liberty was always up at sundown. You could not, there was never any overnight or night liberties in the foreign ports. So the horse was the slowest horse they had in effect. By the time we got back, it was dark. We got back to this landing area, and there's no boats. Now, there's our ship out there, and all your facilities on. I'm 17 years old, and that's my home. My mother and father, everything, whatever it is. That's and man, I'll tell you, about being scared, that was the scariest point of my life. Well, it wasn't more than about 15, 20 minutes. We hear this ding, 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 ding. That's a small boat coming in. They would ring the bell for the motorman to slow the boat down, and they came in. And here it was our boat. They lost the Commodore. So they had a search party on, and they formed in groups and they went up into town, because Capri is an island, so it's up pretty high. They go up these roads. So they went up there. Well, I decided I'm going to stay with the boat because I ain't going to get lost the second time. So they went up there and they found the Commodore. He had a little bit too much to drink. So they got him back down, and the officer was saying, everybody be quiet. Now, the gig had a canvas canopy, and the officers would sit up in front and in the canopy. So they got the Commodore up in there, and everybody else is crowded in the back of the boat, keep him quiet. We get him back on the ship, put him in his room, and we never heard a word about it the next day at all, but at least we got back to the ship. These trips up there would take us about 3 days up, take 4 days to unload a troop ship, and then 3 days back to Mirs El Kabir. It would take about a week to load the ship into Mirs El Kabir. So our ship basically would just sit there, and some of the other ships would. We had a destroyer tender there called the Boutcher, which could make or repair under anything. These ships needed a lot of repair and maintenance. So in that period of time, you would be in there getting things fixed up. One time, the Commodore arranged for us to go to this here city, Belle Abbott. It's a town 100 miles inland from Oran, and it's a French Foreign Legion port, right on the border of the Sahara Desert. And of course, around every Foreign Legion port, there's an Arab town that forms. So they loaded us in the back of these Army 10-wheelers, open trucks, and the roads weren't very good. So it took us about 4.5 hours, something like that, to get there, riding in the back of these 10-wheelers. The good thing was they let us go in dungarees, because if we had gone in whites, we would look like khaki by the time we got there. So that was one of our side trips. Another thing the Commodore did for us was there was an abandoned building in Mirs El Kabir, and he got us to fix it up, and he made it a destroyer club. And we were allowed beer, but you're never allowed to drink beer on the ship. So you could take your rations, you could take it over there, and you could drink your beer at the destroyer club. Anyway, we were making these here convoy trips up there. One of the trips we were in the Naples area. I had gig duty. Usually as a seaman, you get duties. You get mess duty. It was 3 months. You get mess duty 3 months. You get gig duty. You might have a quarter deck to clean. That was your cleaning area or whatever. I had the gig duty. We're taking the Commodore to another ship. Now, when he goes to another ship, it's usually because he's going to see somebody equal or higher than him, not just anybody. And we're flying the 1 star, white flag with the 1 star on it, which indicates who's on your ship, you know, of rank. And in came 3 PT boats. Well, the Commodore is up with his group of officers in this here canopy, and I'm the bow hook man, which is a guy that would stand up on the bow, catch the lines, or to hold the boat in. But I'm sitting in the back with the coxswain and the engineer, and these 3 PT boats came whizzing by us and came down our side and never slowed down. And the coxswain had enough sense to turn and go in to cross the wake. Well, boom, 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 this here boat went up and down. We got soaked. The 3 of us in the back got completely soaked. Now this is January. This is not, and there, Naples is stuff better than right here in Philadelphia in January as far as the water is concerned. So the Commodore poked his head out. What the heck happened? And the coxswain just pointed. He says, those boats over there just cut us off. He said, forget where we're going to follow them. So they went in back of this breakwater, because we had been anchored out at this point. We went into the back of the breakwater, and he went up there, and he gave them a tongue lash. And I never heard some of the words, you know, that he gave us. And of course, his officers are in back taking down names, right, you know, for all this time. So anyway, we took him over to where he had to go. And normally, when you take the Commodore, you stay. You don't go someplace else. You stay there. I don't care how long he's going to be on there, you stay. But he was getting off, and he says, Cox, he says, you go back and get a relief crew and send them back here with the boat, but get yourself changed. So we had enough sense to to let us go get changed into dryer clothes and what have you. Anyway, right after that, we went in the invasion of Anzio. On the third night of Anzio, we've had air attacks the first and second night, but the third night they changed their format of bombing, and instead of like just coming and generally bombing anything, they went in groups and started attacking the ships in groups, maybe 4 or 5 or whatever. And in this here attack, we got hit with a 500-pound bomb. It hit right after the second smokestack. We had 2 smokestacks. Right after the second smokestack, and we had a 1.1 gun. Now, a 1.1 gun, the British call them pom-poms. There was 4 guns here and 4 here, and then boom, boom, they would just go up like this, but they would use one heck of a lot of ammunition. So, and it also lit the ship up like just, you had searchlights on it. It was just unbelievable. So, while all these planes are coming in on the lower level, they're up there and they're dropping bombs, and one of them hit us with 500 pounds. And it apparently hit right at that point. And that's right over number 2 engine room. And of course, underneath of this gun was the ammo magazine, and the explosion went down and just destroyed the engine room. And right there is your fire room, right before it. So fortunately, we still had the forward engine room. Okay. One engine room ran, the forward ran the starboard screw, and the rear engine room ran the port screw. It didn't buckle the sides. It tore the port side, it tore everything over to about 3 feet from the starboard side, which left us about 3 feet of walkway up there. But it didn't buckle the sides of the ship. Now, our ship was made of 1/2-inch steel plates. It was what you call a riveted ship. It wasn't a welded ship. And it was a pretty sturdy ship. In the battle, we lost 53 men. We had 25 killed and 28 missing. Some were just blown over, some were unidentifiable, whatever. After they put the fire out, and now this is 5:30 at night. So they put the fire out, and we limped back to Palermo, Sicily, and they made repairs in Palermo, Sicily, assessed the damage, and they put us in dry dock. They want to send us back to the States, so they took off the port screw because the port engine was destroyed, and it was a drag on the ship. So they took that screw off and they put it. Now this propeller is about 10 foot in diameter and solid bronze, and they put it on the fantail, and they welded rods over it so that it wouldn't, come off, but making us ready. I was at this time standing wheel watches on the ship, not at general quarters, but when you're ready for duty, I was standing wheel watches. And after we got the ship all repaired, or temporary repair, they had to fill this hole up because the water would come right over and go in and flood us if we didn't. They took us on a test run. They had this naval engineer there. And I can remember I'm on the wheel, and we could get it up to 25 knots with one screw. And we're going 25 knots, and he says, okay, now throw it in reverse. And they threw that engine in reverse. And that ship just doop, 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 just like this, because it's, your momentum's going forward, but the screw is dragging you back until finally it came to a stop. And then they checked all the points, because they had people. They wanted to see if the ship was going to split in two. And this was the test, right outside of Palermo, Sicily. And it held up. So he says, okay, you're safe to go back to the States. In the meantime, another ship, the Gleaves, got hit. Shell came over, and it knocked off their radar and their radio antenna. The top of the mast just knocked it right off. And so they had to come back to the States. Well, we had lost all the depth charges on the rear end of the ship. We couldn't drop or use any depth charges. Our 2 rear guns were knocked out of place, off balance. You couldn't even use them. One engine, which our maneuverability was cut down. The Gleaves, though, had good maneuverability, but they had no radar and no radio. they rigged up short distance radio, but they didn't have any really big radio transmissions. So we were basically the eyes and ears. So they came back with us. We were the eyes and ears. They were our protection. See, if we got a sonar contact, we could direct them in on it. Because they had the depth charges, or they had the firepower. So anyway, we made it back with no incidents to New York, got repaired in record time. When we pulled into New York, in Brooklyn Navy Yard, right there where we were, alongside where we were, there was already the engine room was sitting there on railroad cars. The superstructure that went over this engine room, our one smokestack was so full of holes, looked like a shot of a shotgun. So they had a new smokestack sitting there for us. And the two guns on the rear were at a point where, because they'd been fired so many times, they had to be replaced anyway. The two whole housings were sitting there, the turrets and whatever, to go on. I went home for 14 days leave. When I came back, that engine room was in and the bulkhead or the superstructure was already over. I mean, they had worked day and night on that thing, getting that ship back together. And we left about the first week of May, not knowing where we're going, but we went up towards Boston. And as we got up there, we started picking up more ships. And we picked up 3 battleships at Texas, Arkansas, and Nevada, and 3 heavy cruisers, the Augusta, Tuscaloosa, and the Nevada. Now, Nevada was a brand new ship, the Quincy. The Quincy originally was sunk out there in Guadalcanal, so this was a new one they had built. And the Quincy had the flag on, which means it had the admiral on board. The Augusta, now these are all heavy cruisers. The Augusta, a lot of people don't realize that before this period of time, planes couldn't fly very far. So Roosevelt that was his personal ship, the Augusta was. He traveled across, meet Churchill, different places, whatever. He always went on the Augusta. And Augusta had an elevator on it. Now, there was very few ships ever had an elevator. I guess built in there especially for him because he was on a wheelchair, and when he came on board that ship, he could go up and down in different areas with this elevator. And of course, it had deluxe accommodations for him. So when they went into Normandy, the Bradley and Montgomery were on the Augusta. That was their like the command ship for the whole thing, because they were on the Augusta. I guess because it had more facilities to handle. When we were on the way over, we had 32 destroyers, 3 battleships, 3 cruisers, and an oiler, because the destroyers had to be, were traveling about 20 knots. The destroyers had to be refueled about every 3-4 days. So this was quite a group. If you look at the guys in the Pacific, they would say, oh, that's just nothing. But when you get that many in the Atlantic, that's quite a group. They go on at one spot. So we knew there was something up. A couple of days before we got into Belfast, Ireland, the Quincy decided they wanted to go in early. The admiral, he wanted to get in there. So they dispatched the Plummet and another destroyer to escort him in. And I'm on the sound gear. At this time, I just made, I'm a striker. A striker is an apprentice in the Navy for sound. And I'm on the sound gear. And Jerome, my 2 monitor there, or monitor, he says, what's going on? All this water noise. After we went from 20 knots, we went to 25. You can't hear anything because there's too much water noise. So they're supposed to tell you at the bridge to raise the sound gear, but they didn't. So anyway, he stuck his head out the pilot house, and then the sound room was right behind it. So he just opened the door and he says, what's going on out there? We can't hear. And he said, oh, in fact, they raised the sound down. Well, I pushed the button, and up come the sound down. And then, boom, we hit this thing, and you could feel it all over the ship. Well, they went down. The sound room was underneath the chief's quarters. And they went down there, and there's water coming in that room down there. We hit something and put a big hole in the sound down. Now, this sound gear was just brand new put on in Brooklyn Navy Yard just a month before. It was developed right here in Princeton University, different universities developed different things, and they were one of the developers from the Navy on sound, and it was the latest that they had out. So anyway, we continued on, took the Quincy into Belfast, and Belfast is like Philadelphia. It's way up. You have like the Delaware Bay, we have the Belfast Bay in it, and you have all the ships anchored out into that bay. But the difference is they had a deep water bay, where Delaware Bay you could only have channels in there. All the ships finally came in. They had to anchor out, and then when they go on Liberty, they had to take a boat up into the city of Belfast. We went right into Belfast Navy Yard, and they finally put us in dry dock. And in dry dock, they found that we had a fish, because they found flesh and bones in this here hole that was punctured in this here casing of the sonar gun. Now, they had no facilities there to fix this thing. So we figured, oh, we're going back to the States. Well, they flew over. It took them 2 weeks to get the thing fixed. They flew over the casing and whatever parts they needed, and somebody to work on it, because this was brand new equipment, and they got us back in shape. In the meantime, all the other destroyers were out on exercises, practice landings, whatever, and we're sitting in town having the life of luxury there. And finally, to get us fixed, and they put us out, we started doing some maneuvers. And a couple of days before we were getting ready to leave, which we didn't know we were getting ready, John Ford came on our ship. John Ford was a Hollywood director of a lot of big movies, and he was a personal friend of Franklin Roosevelt. And apparently, and I just read this recently, but he was chosen to take care of all the photography for the Allied navies for the invasion. And according to the book, he had 500 cameras strategically placed on landing craft ships. He had 2 that went in with the frogmen, and some of the pictures you're seeing of people coming in were actually taken from his people who had already been in there. You know, and it said like one of the men that was in there was killed later on the first day by either friendly or enemy fire. We don't know at this point. But John Ford was there taking pictures. Now we were assigned to the Texas. Each group had destroyers that were assigned to take care of the capital ships. That meant they would be, they could lay smoke screen, the escorter, whatever they told us to do, that's what we did. We left Belfast, and we were coming down the English Channel, going to this invasion. And of course, then the thing was delayed 24 hours. So what we did, we did a 180-degree turnaround, went straight north for 12 hours, turned around in another 12 hours. We were back to where we were the day before. And at that point, we continued on. The invasion went. We went in with the fire support group O. At this point, we had buoys put on the back of our ship. We didn't know what the buoys were for. But as the minesweepers went in, they had to clear an area for these battleships and cruisers. There was 2 battleships and 3 cruisers. And I think it was about 8 or 9 destroyers in this group that I've lost some of my notes here. Yeah. It was 2 battleships, 3 cruisers, 8 destroyers, U.S. destroyers, and 3 British destroyers. We followed the minesweepers in. There was a couple other destroyers had buoys on too, and as the minesweepers cleared on this area, we were thrown the buoys over, and they had lights on them. They were lighted because this is still dark to a degree at this point. You know, we're talking about 4 o'clock in the morning. The sun comes up anywhere between 5 and 5:30 over there. They call it the longest day because it's a Sunday. The sunlight, it was the longest day that you could have of sunlight in that time, because it didn't get dark till maybe 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. So anyway, we put the buoys out, and they were cutting, these minesweepers come in, and they actually cut mines. You know, there were parabanes out there sweeping, and they cut them. And then it was up to other ships to destroy them. You shoot at them. you know, we found out the best thing to shoot on was 40 millimeters, because unless you hit one of those ear tips on that mine, it's not going to explode. But a shell explodes, of course, fragments go over and hit on it, and they do explode. Anyway, we were inboard of the Texas at the invasion. When that Texas would fire, I mean, our ship would just lean over like this. Now, I would say we were a good half mile to a mile inland of the Texas. And we're close enough that we can see what's going on. We were in the Point de Hoc, which is where the cliffs of the Rangers went up. That was our area right there. Things weren't going too good. And all of a sudden, you know, at about 11 o'clock, they said all the destroyers moved in as close as you can to within like 500 yards of the beach and stay. Because this invasion is, we're not leaving the invasion. Even if you have to drop anchor, you just stay. So they moved us in, and we were firing point blank. And we were firing basically at the area in the Point de Hoc area. Because the Germans, the Rangers had, some of them had gotten up, and the others were still going up, but they had pockets drilled in these, or cut out of these cliffs, and they had people in there with guns firing. And it was just like you were shooting at the wall of the different areas when you'd find, it was all visual, whatever you would see, they were firing at them. That went on for a couple hours until things broke. And of course the big ships kept on firing into the night. Now I'm talking about into the night, into the evening, because it was still light. They had better range than what we had. That night we were pushed out to the perimeter. Now from where this was almost like a U-shaped area, this whole invasion area, from one point to the other, there was 70 or 80 miles of open water, and you had yourself thousands of ships in there that had to be protected. So the destroyers, they had a screen out there, but at night they moved them, all of them out there. Because E-boats, which is a German torpedo boat, were the things that they were worried about. Submarines weren't our biggest problem because they didn't have enough depth to operate in that. You know. But the E-boats would come up, and they found out the first night the E-boats would come up, and then they sent out one destroyer. What they did was they'd have 4 or 5 of them like tied together or close together, and on the radar you only get one target. But as soon as the destroyer went out there, you had yourself 4 or 5 targets on the thing, and they couldn't really handle them because you only, that radar, director that had radar, we had 4 guns. When that radar director pointed at a target, all 4 guns fired to one target, so we weren't able to split up. So anyway, from that time on, they went out in 3s and 4s with the destroyers. And the one thing they were afraid of, the Germans weren't afraid of much as getting direct hit. They would fire bursting shells, the fragments. That's what they were afraid of, you know, because they would do more damage than a direct hit. So you just start firing shells that would explode at a time period. And this went on like every night, every evening. The E-boats were the biggest menace to the area. The second night, the Quincy needed ammunition, so we and another ship took the Quincy back to England. Went into Portsmouth, England, and we worked on offloading ammunition on our ship. They were working on their ship, got fuel, got food, and back the next morning to the area, and the Quincy then started firing again. It was on the 3rd night, we're out there on patrol. We pick up a target about 11 o'clock at night at a distant range, and so you start tracking a target. So we were ordered to go out and investigate. And it wasn't common, it was coming from England, it wasn't coming from up along the coast. That was a strange target. So they have a challenge, they have a recognition signal. And our ship was giving them the challenge, and they never answered yes or no or the right recognition signal. So we threw up a couple star shells, and star shell is just a shell that has a parachute on it and lights up the area. It didn't do a very good job because it wasn't elevated to the proper thing, and it didn't stay there or hang very long. It just came right on down. Well, it looked like, you know, some type of a capital ship out there, and we started firing. We fired 96 rounds of shells. We hit it 4 times. Here it was, British cable ship, which we had no knowledge of. They were laying a cable across for communication, and it had this barge in the back of it, where the cable was on. But we hit the bow of the bridge, the stern, and the barge, sunk the barge. And I can remember I was on the boarding party at that time for extra duty things to do. And the doctor, they sent the doctor over on the boarding party to help. And on the way over, the doctor is saying, "Don't anybody say," we found out by now it was a British ship, so I said, "Don't anybody say it was us firing. Say it was somebody else, because they're going to hang us right from the yard on it." I said, "You can." But that all we had to say was hang, because then you keep your mouth shut. And they were hot, because they knew it was friendly fire, but they didn't know who it was doing. So it was a couple men killed on the ship, and a few men wounded. The next morning, we were ordered to come alongside the Quincy, or come near the Quincy, and the captain went over, and he must have got chewed out, I'll tell you something, because the Quincy had the admiral on board, and at that time he heard about it. Well, what a lot of people didn't know was the logistics in this here invasion was quite a great thing. They were laying 4 lines across that channel. They were laying a gas line, a diesel line, 2 communication lines. They needed supplies over there, and needed fuel supply, and they couldn't get enough in by tanker because they had no docks at this point. So this whole stuff was pre-laid out, and here we went and shot up one of the communication lines. So it wasn't until they took Cherbourg that they had a deep enough harbor that they could get the troops right in to land or take off a foot on a dock, or they could bring the boilers in, because these ships were used for these tanks and what have you, and trucks were using up a lot of fuel, and of course the men needed supplies in there. So it was really a setback for the operation to have us sink this barge out there. The next incident, we stayed on the patrol every night after that until the Battle of Cherbourg, which the Army was going out this peninsula, and they were very close to Cherbourg, and they needed fire support. So they called on the Navy, and the Navy went in from the sea, and we started bombarding on the 24th or 25th of June. We started bombarding Cherbourg. Now these people, the Germans, were smart. They would let you come in, until they got you well in their range. And then they had all that distance as you started going out, all that distance to fire at you as you were going out. Well, it wasn't more than a couple shots fired by the Texas. We were still the Texas at this point, as protection with a couple other destroyers. And at this point, after a couple shots of the Texas, the Germans started firing back, and one of the shells hit the Texas on the superstructure, which is just below the bridge. They said it was about an 8-inch shell. Well, we were called on to lay a smoke screen. It was another destroyer and us. We were going around this Texas laying a smoke screen. Now, they're not firing at us, but it's like we're crazy. We're going around it, and they're firing at the Texas, and the shells are landing all over the place. And how they ever missed us or the other destroyer, I'll never know, because it's like somebody throwing snowballs and you're running in the mudslide. We withdrew to the point they assessed the damage on the Texas, and then they went back in again, and they started firing again. Well, the same thing happened the second time. And we fired a few rounds, but we were usually out at a point where we didn't have much range. A 5-inch gun doesn't have much range, like the Texas had 14-inch guns on it. So this went on all afternoon. And nighttime we retired out to sea, And then the next morning we started again. And in reading the report, Don gave me a report on this Battle of Cherbourg, that the Army said that we did tremendous damage to the, maybe not the pillboxes, because they were pretty well in there, but the ships were firing at targets that were being directed from the land, Army observers and what have you, and they hit tanks, trucks, whatever, and it helped them, and it was like their artillery support, helped them move in. So after 2 days, we left there and went back to Belfast, Ireland, our group. There the group kind of formed, because the big heavy artillery wasn't needed from the sea after this point, because once they got Cherbourg, they were able to bring in their troop ships, their tanks, any equipment, because Cherbourg was a big deep water port. And so that was, they didn't have to worry about landing on the beaches anymore with their equipment and what have you. We're back in Belfast, Ireland. The fleet's getting ready. We were going down to the Mediterranean for the invasion of southern France, although we didn't know it. We left Belfast on the 4th of July of that year, 44. A couple of weeks before, or a week before, I guess, one of the officers said, there's a place over here you can get shoes half soled. And maybe, you know, when your shoes wore out, you threw them overboard. Nobody half soled. The destroyer has no facilities or whatever to half sole their shoes. So there's a place here you can get shoes half soled. And it was a reasonable rate. So they must have taken over 100 pair of shoes or something, to get their shoes half soled. We leave Belfast. We go north, up with this group. Now we have the 3 battleships, 3 heavy cruisers. It wasn't 32 destroyers anymore, because we lost about 6 or 8 of them over there in the invasion. But the group of destroyers, and we went up and we went out in the middle Atlantic, and we went down, and we went down far enough that we were out of any plane range of France. See? And we weren't out to sea more than a couple of days, and the shoes started falling apart. Well, here what they used, they didn't have leather. They used, that was all taken by the government. They had pressed paper. And it was great on land, but it wasn't good on solid wood. Well, I tell you, if we could have got back there, we'd have raised hell. We're there with shoes that are peeling apart on this, so the shoes went overboard. And that was the end of that. We went down, and they arranged it to get through Gibraltar at nighttime. And just as we're coming through Gibraltar at nighttime, we have an air raid. Those Germans knew where we were all the time. They just couldn't reach us. And there was enough destroyers that the submarines wanted to stay away from us. So just as we came through Gibraltar, we had an air raid that night. Some of us went into near Zelkabir, that's the town near Edoran. Some of them went to Algiers, whatever. They distributed the ships all along. And at that point, we started getting ready for the invasion of southern France. And so the invasion of southern France was August 15th of 44. Now here's 3 invasions. I'm only just 18 years old at this time. I was 18 December 30th. So January I made Anzio, June Normandy, and August I'm making southern France. So everything in my 18th year seemed to be a big year, and after that then there wasn't that much activity as far as fighting. But anyway, we got ready for southern France. We were again, at this point, assigned to the Quincy as our escort. And we went up there and we did bombarding. The second day we were dispatched to go to Corsica, Giacchio, Corsica. Corsica had a big airfield. And we had to pick up some VPIs. Well, the VPIs were Forrestal. Forrestal was the Secretary of the Navy. Frank Knox had died earlier in the spring, and Forrestal was Assistant Secretary of the Navy. He became Secretary of the Navy. And General Somerville was one of the big generals of the invasion of southern France. We picked up the 2 of them, brought them up, put them on the Quincy. They stayed on the Quincy a couple of days, and then when they went, when Forrestal went back, he went back to Giacchio, Corsica. And a plane then from someplace else. At that point in time, planes could fly, they could fly across the Atlantic from different points, I guess from Newfoundland to England or however they were doing it. But Forrestal had just come down from touring the Normandy invasion, and he came down to Corsica, and he was looking at that invasion down there. After we came back, the port of Toulon was that was a big French naval base. They were important to get the port of Toulon, and then Marseille was a big harbor that could unload and load troop ships, supplies, whatever. So they were very important. So they decided Toulon was the first one. The Army's coming in from the land, and we're going in from the sea. Where we started bombarding. Here's again, they let you come in, fire a couple rounds, and then they were let go. What they had done, the French had a battleship there. It was one of the biggest battleships in the world. It had 18-inch guns on it, and they scuttled it. The Germans took off one of the turrets, and the harbor was protected by just land, a little inlet. And on that there, one part of that there, land that came out there, it was a high area. They had mounted this 18-inch gun turret there, and they were firing at us from that point. There again, like we didn't get in too close for our shells. Maybe they do a lot, but every time they start firing, you would have to lay smoke screens. Now we had in our group, it was sort of the United Nations. We had a couple French ships. We had one, the battleship Lorraine, and there was a couple of the cruisers that were in the area in our group of French cruisers. And at one time we were laying smoke screen around the Lorraine just as they were the Texas when they were firing at her. We fired there for a number of days. Then we moved on down to Marseille. Did the same thing down in Marseille until the Army could take it. They actually took them from the sea. I mean, from the land. There was no landing parties or whatever going in. It was all brought in, but they said we did considerable damage. After that, things settled down there. The invasion, it wasn't much outside of air. And these E-boats, again, they were another thing. They were a menace to us. Air attacks at nighttime, not much during the day, because, see, at Corsica, they had a big airfield. The Army Air Corps had moved up there. They had also, this is the first time they also brought U.S. carriers into action. The U.S. carriers, it was two of them in there on that first invasion, because it was too far. We had 600 miles from Africa up to southern France, so it was too much distance for fighters to come and stay much time over an area. So Corsica could handle some, but the aircraft carriers, the British had 3 and we had 2 aircraft carriers in there. And really the first time, even in Normandy, we didn't have any aircraft carriers up there because they didn't need them. They had the land-based planes. So we had no daytime. Nighttime is what we had, the menace. At this point, I was elevated to a general quarters and special sea detail, helmsman. I had been, even though I was sonar men stood helm watches, wheel watches. And on a destroyer, when you're on that wheel, because that rudder is so far back, it's all hydraulic control, but there's a delayed reaction. And there's an indicator there that shows you exactly where that rudder is at every time. So you turn the wheel, and then that rudder, you could see it would turn, one way or the other. So that when you gave a right degree rudder, and he wanted you to hold it 10 degrees to the right, and then stop, you had to actually sometimes turn it to the left to slow the ship from going past its point. It was not like steering a car. So I was general quarters. We're at general quarters because they picked up a surface target on the radar, a low flying target, and it was going, sometimes it was going 30 miles an hour, and sometimes it was going 60 miles an hour. It would change its speed. And the Captain Alderson, I heard him hollering to the soundman, "What do you got?" Because the sound, you could pick up high-speed propellers if it was a U-boat or a fast-moving surface vessel. They had nothing. We come very close to blowing out of the sky. Here again, nobody ever told us, but they brought blimps in. And nobody ever told us that they had a blimps in the area. And here was a blimp up there. Navy going back and forth. And sometimes we'd be going 30 miles an hour, and sometimes we'd get up to 60. And why we didn't? Because everybody was trigger happy at that point. You know, one of them didn't blow it right out of the sky. From that point on, after the invasion, the Army started moving up the Riviera, the French and the Italian Riviera, and they had no artillery support because it was terrain was very rough. Tanks couldn't go up in there, so they used the Navy ships up there as bombardment. And we had, it would be a 3-day stint. You'd go up there for 3 days, and it was like 3 destroyers together. And we always had PT boats because we had to stay out of the 100 fathom mark. You know, every continent has a shelf. It goes out and then it drops to deep water. And they didn't mine in deep water. They mine in from 100 fathoms or less. So we had to stay out of that 100 fathom mark because you never knew where the mines were. But the PT boats could take care of that. And then they could also stop anything like E-boats coming down along the coast or coming out to get us. We went down there and we bombarded for like 3 days. And it was all by military, either a Piper Cub or a land spotter would give you the fixings on where to fire your shells. And the Germans, of course, there again will let you come in, and then they'd start firing at you. And they fired at these 88s. Well, I don't know if you ever heard of an 88, but when an 88 goes off, it's such a crack that when it misses you, if it hit you, you wouldn't know it. But you know, when it misses you, it's such a crack that you could tell an 88 from any other type of thing. And they had a terrific range. They had as much range as our 5-inch or more, because they used a very high velocity powder. And it had a long muzzle of a gun on it for some reason. It was one of their best guns that they ever had. But they would fire at us with these 88s. So we go in and fire, and they found out at first we went in and we would almost come to a dead stop. Well, that's the worst thing in the world you can do, because to try to pick up momentum, you have to, it takes you a while to get going. So they found out if you went 4 to 5 knots, you could pick up speed a lot easier and get out of the road. So you go in there and you fire a few shots, and they'd open up on you, and then we'd move, you know. And this went on for up till December. At December, they moved down to a point where they didn't need us anymore, into the Alps area. And December, we went back to Oran. We spent Christmas in Oran. And first week of January, we picked up a convoy of LSTs. There was about 100 LSTs, because they didn't need them over there anymore. They figured all the invasions are gone, and they were getting taken back and refit them and take them to the Pacific. Now, these are pretty much worn out LSTs at this point. We had a group of destroyers. We brought them back. We ended up towing them. I mean, some of the LSTs that come on were towing LSTs. Our ship happened to be the command ship. The command ship is whoever's the senior officer. He's in that group. He's in charge of the group. We didn't ourselves end up towing any, but we other destroyers ended up towing. So that meant the destroyers that weren't towing had to do double duty of sonar protection. I think it would be pretty hard to hit an LST that's not loaded with a torpedo, because they sit so high in the water. But as we hit the States, we dumped some off in Florida, and some off in Charleston, South Carolina, and some off in Norfolk, and I don't know where the rest of them went, but we went from there to Boston. At Boston, we got some repairs, and they put us on submarine hunt duty. At that time, they were had killer packs. They were put a carrier out there with some, and we were just thrown into a group. Sometime in April, we were assigned to a convoy to England. We were going to Liverpool, England. And on the way over to Liverpool, England, of course, Armistice Day was signed. And because we were at sea, we hit Liverpool. And at that point, it was the first time they ever gave us overnight liberty. The war was over. We went to a town north of Liverpool called Southport. I think they just had a golf match up there in Southport. It's a beautiful resort town. And of course, the Air Corps had that taken over. That was their domain. All the hotels and whatever for their R&R. But the people up there, you could rent a room. It was like bed and breakfast. They would take you in. And it was our little group. We went up there and we stayed there we were there 3 days. Took a train up, stayed in somebody's house. They fed us breakfast. They had a beautiful beach. Now this is April, and it was a little cold, but I remember doing horseback riding and riding on the beach there with the horses and what have you. You couldn't go swimming because it was a little too cold for that. We came back. Now Liverpool, believe it or not, is when we went into Liverpool, we just sailed right in. Now we got to go out. There's an 18-foot tide. You know, they had a wall. Liverpool harbor was built with a huge wall around it. It had locks, and you're coming out, and you have to go to this lock, and they let you down, and then you can see that it was all mud or sand, and then there was this river going out there. And they left you down into this river and went out, got into deep water. But it was the only port I was ever in that had maintained one level at all times. And I could never understand why the Germans didn't bomb that, because it was such a vital thing. It was a very important seaport on the Irish Sea. But you think they would have tried to demolish that there, locks in there, so that it would disrupt the shipment going in and out of Liverpool. Anyway, we came back to the States, went into Boston, and they refitted us. We still had 10 torpedo tubes on our ship, 5 and 5. Never fired one of them. So they took the 10 torpedo tubes off, and they put quad 40s. So we had 3 sets now of quad 40s on the port side and 3 on the starboard side. They had developed a stand-up. It was like this, and it was a radar director, and they'd have either a fire patrolman or an officer there, and wherever he directed that director, those guns were fired by that radar. Up to this time, it was all manual. All these here 40 millimeters were fired, or whatever the guys turned and shot at. So they had one for each gun on the port side and one for each gun on the starboard, which made us a much more forceful firing ship. What we were made into was a picket ship. At Okinawa, they were hitting with the kamikazes. They had destroyers out on the outer line as radar, and they would pick up these kamikazes coming down, and they notified the fleet, and you know that there's a group coming down. Well, they were knocking these here picket ships off left and right out there. Some were sunk, some were heavily damaged. So we were basically, there was 8 of us, 8 destroyers in our group. We were all made into picket ships. From there, we went down to Guantanamo Bay. They call it Gitmo. Extensive fire training down there. They had these here robot planes. They were about 4 or 5 foot in diameter, radio controlled planes, and they would fly them, and you had to fire those things. And some of them, they just dive at your ship. Not that they'd hit the ship, but they'd come right over if you didn't hit it. So it was like actual training of what you maybe were going to get into. As we went through the Panama Canal, we were out there one day, and the war was over in the Pacific. We didn't see any action in the Pacific. We went from there to Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor, we took a convoy to Saipan and stayed there a day or so, and then we went to Wakayama, Japan, with this convoy of troops and equipment. From Wakayama, Japan, we went down to Leyte, or to Leyte. From Leyte, we went around to Gulf, which is north of Manila, and picked up another convoy and took that to Nagoya. And we're sitting in Nagoya. Now, we just come from Gulf, which was beautiful weather. Now, this is November, beginning of November. Beautiful weather. Swimming down there, playing baseball, drinking beer. Get to Japan, said, go to the Illusions. We didn't have any foul weather gear. We went up to Adak. I'm talking about, at that point, it was windy, cold. We got foul weather there at Adak. what they needed, there was 8 destroyers. They needed transportation for troops to get back to the States before Christmas. So they were using the destroyers. So we were all, our group was a pickup at ADEC. We picked up 150. Each ship could take 150. Now, we didn't have room for 150. The soldiers and sailors and airmen were supposed to have the bunks during the day, and they were supposed to get out of them at nighttime. Well, the first night I come down, and this guy's about 6'6", with shoes like this, and I had a top bunk, which is the class bunk at that time. And I'm looking at this shoe like this, and I'm supposed to tell him to get out of my bunk. I want to get in there. Well, you start looking for another bunk, see. So we took this group down, and it took us 3 days to get to Seattle. We dropped them off in Seattle. We came back. We were supposed to make these runs until we get everybody down. The Coast Guard ship out in the Bering Sea. It's an aerologist on it, and that's where they got all the weather reports there from the West Coast. Apparently, that was the point of the best point to get the thing. See, it broke down. Well, the tugs went out there and towed it back, and they put the aerologist on our ship, and we went out there for 21 days. We were out there. We just did 4 knots. Those swells, I mean those swells. And our ship was covered with ice. They had to keep moving the guns every so often to break the ice so that the mounts just wouldn't freeze in place. At one point they had, on places on the quarterdeck, they had steam line that come up and they just steamed and knocked off some of the ice that would build up on the guns. Meantime, all these here other destroyers have gone down to Seattle and back down and back. After 21 days, they bring us back in. And we come back into ADEC, and we make another trip, and this time we went to San Francisco. Now it's getting very close to Christmas. So we hit Frisco, I guess, a week, a couple of days before Christmas, and unloaded, and we stayed at Frisco until right after the New Year. After the New Year, our group got together again, and we went down through the Panama Canal, and we were due to go through in the canal. They could take us 2 at a time. But now you have 8 destroyers to go through there, and they were due to go through by tomorrow. Well, there was 2 battleships, the Wisconsin and it was South Dakota, and the Wisconsin was sitting there. And apparently they decided they wanted to go through tomorrow. Well, of course they had rank over ours, so they went through the next day. And we lost our turn. We sat there for a week. Well, it wasn't bad duty because they had a big, in that area, they had a big recreation center and a swimming pool, and of course it was beautiful weather. And we sat there. Finally, it was our turn to go through. Now, in this group of 8, we were low man on the totem pole as far as our skipper's numbers were concerned. So the first 2 went through, the next 2, the next 2. And they had a point 100 miles out at sea, a rendezvous point. That took us 8 hours to get through. So after the first group was through there, 8 hours later, we're just starting to go through. So, we're like 16 hours behind when we hit the Caribbean. Now, we got to go 100 miles an hour to meet them out there. They're going at a certain rate, at a certain course and speed, and we had to meet them. And at that point, the Caribbean can get pretty rough as far as swells and what have you. And we went up and over, and that was really the only time I ever got seasick. I mean, I've been through. We had a typhoon off Okinawa. I went through that. It upset me, but it didn't bother me. This thing really made me seasick. We caught up with the group. They decided we were going to Charleston, South Carolina to be decommissioned. So they decided one day, it was a pretty nice day, let's put a speed run out. See how fast these ships are, how the engines are doing. Why? I don't know, because they're going to decommission them. So they get us up to 35 knots, about the fastest we could go. And one after another, the ships started breaking down. They couldn't maintain the speed. So they could keep on going, I know, but they just couldn't maintain the speed. So they just abandoned that idea and brought it back to about 20 knots. And we ended up going into Charleston, South Carolina, and that's where the ship was decommissioned. Just before it got decommissioned, see, I had gone in on a minority cruise, which is what they call a kiddie cruise. Doing on 17, anytime in your 17th year, but you get out the day you're 21. Well, I wasn't going to be 21 until December, but because I had enough points and they didn't need anybody, they said if you want to get out, you can get out. So I came home, and that was the end of my Navy time. So.
Well, that's good. Thank you. Jack mentioned something that I thought I'd recall to you that is related to our upcoming talk, October 22nd, a Thursday at the library. There's a George Hinckley speaking there. You mentioned the drone target planes. George Hinckley was charged with taking a destroyer that had been hit by kamikazes. It was an old 25-year-old USS Barry, and it had been taken into the junkyard, essentially, Camerata, I think it is, where they towed all the ships that had been damaged severely for either repair or decommissioning. And he was charged with going in there, picking a ship. They had picked the Barry, and repair that as necessary and convert it to a decoy that you can put out in a picket station and let the kamikaze hit it rather than a capital ship. And so Jack will be talking, or not Jack, you Jack. George will be talking about that as part of his story. He had a father and an older brother who went to the academy, and he wanted to do so, but his eyesight wasn't good enough. And so he apologetically said, but I went to Harvard. And he eventually was able to get a Navy commission. He was into logistics procurement, I guess, for quite a while. And then he was out and assigned to the staff of an Admiral Harry Hill, who had the 5th Amphibious Force, and had some responsibilities for shore bombardment direction, I guess, for the fleet, or for his force. And he did that for Iwo Jima and Okinawa, and he will be talking some about that. I believe he has some video film that he's going to show also of kamikaze attacks on ships, and that'll be part of his lecture. So any of you that are interested in more of this kind of stuff, come out Thursday, 22nd of October. Last time we had 118 people, which was overflow for the room. We had planned for it, and we had a overflow room set up with a television in it, videotaping the talks. It was easy to put the television on in the next room. So we had 28 people in the overflow room.
Is it a Thursday, Don?
It's going to be Thursday this time. Yeah, and there's going to be another change. Once you get used to Thursday, it's going to be Friday in November and December here, and Jack's going to be back here in this room up at the far end for the library talk. The library is closing down for construction work, with some repair or expansion or whatever they're doing. So how about a few questions, and maybe Jack has a few more answers if you want. Anybody here that has similar experience in the Navy? Anybody have shore duty in southern France or anything like that? There you are.
I'm not involved, but my brother was the Seabees,
Mm-hmm.
and he was involved in the invasion of southern France, building a submarine refueling station, I think. And he was there for quite a few months, and he met, and of course my brother is like my father. They were good at languages. Now, German was our background, but he lived in South Texas and knew Mexican, Spanish. And he met a Spanish family that was in France. They were from Spain. He got to talk to them. He learned to speak French from the Spanish people.
But there's a similarity, I guess. Yeah.
Right. Well, Spanish is Spanish. You know, of course, they're different idioms. But one of the things he did, they had a deep hole they had to dig because of a broken fuel line. And my brother was in welding. He was a welder. And they needed somebody with welding experience. And of course, it's kind of a dangerous situation because it could have flashed into the fire because of the oil that had been leaking. And he assigned to him a German prisoner of war. And this prisoner of war got along fine with my brother because they could speak the language, and he was almost, well, he was willing to help him. And they finished this repair job, and my brother got a commendation for doing it with a dangerous operation. But this German prisoner of war brought the world to my brother because they could speak German together. So that was a little background in that same area, southern France.
One thing I remember in the southern France area there, we were ashore, because we were operating out of Toulon and Marseille after they'd taken over. And back in the Toulon area, you would go ashore and the German prisoners were being used to clean up just general labor work. Most of them were older men. And there didn't seem to be anybody around watching them, you know, and they were working there, and I guess they were happy as a lark.
They were happy to be there.
They were being fed and they weren't being shot at. They weren't in any prisoner of war camp. They had some type of distinctive uniform on it. You could tell that they were a prisoner, but it was just a different thing to see that. Because like in the Navy, you never see anybody, you don't see the enemy that much.
Yes.
But I remember the very first time I went on my ship, we were in Palermo, Sicily, and we came on. Now, there was 22 in our group that went over. There was a few what's called rated men had come out of Sampson with radio radar schools, and they were like third class, but the basic of us was all food seamen, second class seamen. They lined us up on the quarterdeck, and the chief came up and said, I need 5 guys for the black gang. And I didn't want to go, I knew that was enough. We were going down. I didn't want to go down. I want to go up, or stay up. So the rest of us, the rated men, went to where they were supposed to go, and this here boatswain, old-time boatswain. Okay, how many are regular and how many are reserves? You know, well, he didn't like reserves. Because I went in at 17, I had a regular classification, you see. And so I got along pretty good with them. And some of the other older boats being regular, and it made a difference for some of us. But they, at that point, they still didn't make the reserves.
Reserves.
You did earn the rank.
Yeah.
What rank were you when you got out?
A sonar 3rd class. When we got hit, you know, we had 9 people in our sonar gang. There's only 3 at one time on the machine. So you have what they call a stack. You have a recorder alongside of it, and then you have a pedometer, which is the depth gauge. It takes 3 men to operate those things. So the rest of the men are scattered at any place that you're assigned to. And out of the 9 men, 6 were, 3 were killed and 3 were badly wounded of the sonar. So they had taken quite a hit in the group. Being on the bridge of Wheel Watch, I knew the sonar man in this here first class Jerome. See, nobody ever called him by their first name. Everything was last name, or Mac, hey Mac. But anyway, Jerome was our first class soundman. He says, would you like to strike? And it was interesting to me. So I was a striker on the way home. And there would always be somebody right there, and we had kind of antiquated equipment because we had a round scope, and that thing would go around, and you had to watch it because when you would go ick, which would be an echo, where that ick, there was ranges there. You had to pick out that range, see? So you had to really be very observant, what have you. Now the next, when we come back, we got the newest equipment on. It was just a line went out, and when it went pick, and it would come out, and it would, the light, even though it kept on going, would stay there for a second or so. See, so you had a little bit more leeway in your time, so it was much better equipment. The other thing was like in New York getting repaired. The Navy doesn't like to sit around doing anything. They had the fire watches. All these guys in there welding and chipping. Everybody had a sailor there with a fire extinguisher. And the guys that weren't doing anything were either sent to fire school, gunnery school, or something. And the sonar men went to sonar school every day. Sometimes the captain would go. They had a simulated sit there with a screen, and the back of that screen they had a projection, and they could on the screen you'd see your ship, and they'd have a submarine, and you would start sitting out here, you'd start your search, and all of a sudden now we couldn't see any of this stuff. We'd pick up an echo, but they're observing all this stuff. Now they had officers there that were like ODs or JODs who would do the direction of the ship. And as you gave them information, they would actually con the ship to, and you'd make simulated runs, and they could rate you on this. And this was day after day. But it'd be, we're talking about February and March in Brooklyn Navy Yard. If he's on a fire watch on a ship that had no heat. They didn't take us off the ship when they were repairing our ship. You're trying to sleep on a ship that's all steel and a chicken hammer's going up in the front of the ship, and that goes back here. All on the docks, they had cut off our electricity and water, but they had temporary electric on there. And of course, the heat was cut off completely. On the dock, they had these latrines or heads, and there were big areas and washrooms. And we just took our mattress and we over and slept on the floor over there because that was heated, and you didn't have that noise. You had some noise, but you didn't have the noise you had on the ship. Going to sunrise school was a lot better. These guys that went to fire school, they would take them. They had simulated buildings, cinder block of compartments, and they'd have a door here, and you go through 3 or 4 compartments. And they had these instructors who were firemen, professional firemen who would take it. And the Navy they had a core pipe. It was a metal pipe or pipe with had a hook on the end, and then the nozzle was out there. And you just stick it in the room, and spray around, and the spray would knock it down. And they would go through 1 room, 2 room, 3 rooms, and then they would set the first room back on fire again. Now there's no way out. The only thing they said was in your favor was that the guy, the instructor, he's right there with you, and say, he didn't send you in there by himself. And the thing was that you went through a room too fast. If you don't knock the fire down, spontaneous bust, you ignite a fire again. So they had simulated conditions, but it was work. Those guys worked. They come home, they were tired at the end of the day. And then they sent them up to Quonset Point, Rhode Island, which is a gunnery school, and that's right out on the point of Rhode Island. In that time of year, man, it's cold out there in a Quonset hut. I went 1 week there for 20mm school. Oh, an incident I have to tell you about. On the way over to England, this is how the Navy thinks. I'm sonar man. They put me on number 2, behind number 2 gun on a 20mm. Now I'm a magazine. You have a guy that guns, and you have 2 guys that have magazines. When you put a magazine on this side, and as it empties, this guy is ready, and he sticks one on this side so the guy can keep firing. After 2 magazines, you take the barrel out and you put it in water, and you stick another barrel in, and you put it in and give it a twist. With a firing at planes, and I'm a sonar man. Round comes number 2 gun. Now it hits a stop, so it can't shoot the bridge off. But at that stop, you're about 10 feet away from that gun, and it goes whoom. Well, that goes my ears. I couldn't hear. Well, the communication officer gave that guy who assigns us the duties such a tongue lash. How could you ever put a sonar in there? He needs his ears. So for about a week, I couldn't hear. So then they put me in the 20mm magazine, which is in the above the deck, but in the midship, and where you refill all the magazines. And during the Normandy invasion, that's where I was. I was in this here magazine. But we never fired at nighttime, or planes, because they had air protection. If we did fire at nighttime, it was only 5-inch or 40. We never fired. The only time we fired 20mm was like mines. When we didn't see the mines, they'd fire their 20s. So I didn't really have much to do physically during the invasion, which was the worst thing in the world to do, is stand around doing nothing. I'd rather be doing something. But that's my station during that period of time.
Show how you chip and paint.
Oh, I did that. I did paint. Yeah, they say if the moon's saluted, it doesn't move painted. Well, when we got hit, the biggest thing was, you wonder how a steel ship could burn. It was paint burn. Just, so much coat of paint on it that, if it wasn't for the Navy having great fire protection, we had handy billies. When we go into an area, we'd have handy billies. Like we had 3 on the starboard, 3 on the port. Handy billy is nothing more than a gasoline pump, and it had a suction hose with a big hunk of cast iron pipe, and you turn that over the side, and the hose was all flaked out, just laid out. And fortunately, when that engine room got hit, our whole after fire mains were down. That was nothing there. So the handy billies actually saved the day for putting the fire out. So they were very conscious, and they thought of a lot of things. Didn't think about putting ear protection on you or like that. I see these kids today, they go out on a boat. They all have life jackets on, you see them with these orange life jackets. They have ear protection, they have eye protection. We went out in the roughest seas in this here whaleboat gig, and never had a lifeboat or belt or life vest on or whatever. Never wore ear protections. The ship was loaded with asbestos. We were steamed, 600 pounds of steam. That was steam that would come out, you couldn't even see it. If it come out of a tiny hole or whatever. All of those pipes were covered with asbestos. And then, of course, the Navy or the people that worked on them, they had to put all that asbestos in there. But I guess it was the only thing they had at the time to, for the protection. So, yeah.
Earlier in the talk, you spoke about gig duty. What is that?
The gig is a whaleboat. The Navy had double winders. They're 26 foot long. They were pointed stern and bow. And the gig is nothing more than a whaleboat with a canopy over it. That's a captain's boat. They call it the gig. The open boat is where the enlisted men. We anchored out most of the time. When you're anchored out and you want to go ashore, you go back on the thing. When you get on those boats, you go on by rank. The officers and chiefs first, and then the first class, and then the second load is the second class and the third class. And little old seaman like me was the last guy to get over. See, of course, coming back, I was always like the first, but there was no rank in coming back. But going over was always rank getting off that ship, if there was room. But the gig is the captain's boat. And since we had a Commodore on board, now our ship was built for 160. We had 260, plus we had the flag. Now the flag means that we had the Commodore on a 1-star admiral, but he was like acting. He was a 4-star. He was a 4-striper captain, acting Commodore, and he carried a staff of about 20 people. And when we got hit, they stayed there. Now they had some of their men killed too, because in the course of general quarters, they're assigned to stations also. But whatever staff was left stayed there and went on to another ship, and the rest of the ship's company came back to the States. But now that's all it is. It's a gig. Now the larger ships had better and larger boats because they had more personnel. But we had two. We had a gig and a whaleboat, and you would have duties. Seamen would get duties, even coxswains. Which is a coxswain is a 3rd-class boatswain, just a 1-stripe here boatswain. Coxswain duty, he would be like the gig duty or whaleboat duty. He might be in charge of the quarterdeck and have the men under him. Coxswain's a good rate. He gets to give out all the orders. You go on a working party, he's usually the guy that takes the working party, and the working party on a ship could be radiomen, signalmen, whatever, made up into and go pick up supplies, ammunition, whatever you're going to pick up. Usually a coxswain's in charge of it. And so you didn't have to do anything, but you had a lot of responsibility. So it was a good rate. The one thing I found out in the Navy real fast, you got to have something to barter with. Money didn't buy anything, but if you had a service or whatever, you could barter with. And I had nothing to barter with, low to seamen. the laundry guy, he had a really good advantage because everything was washed in salt water with yellow soap, but the officers and chiefs got washed in fresh water. But you see some of these other guys, and you didn't get anything pressed either. You know, they got their stuff pressed. You see some of these other guys, some nice, clean, soft whites, pressed. You know, where there's something, they had something to barter with that laundry guy, you know. The cooks, because they had food, they could barter. The only thing I found out, I didn't smoke at the time. I smoked a pipe, but I didn't smoke cigarettes. And we were kind of rationing on cigarettes, 2 packs a week, 2 cartons a week. It was 10 cents a pack, or I mean, $1 a carton. You had to buy them by carton. You had to buy your candy by carton. You call that pogey bait. You bought everything by the box. So I didn't smoke cigarettes. And these guys would run out of cigarettes, so I started, hey, I'll take my rations. And they would smoke anything after, you know, when they don't have their brand to smoke, you know, so you could sell them or barter with, you know, for, so that was one of the advantages. But I've always down, even to this day, man, I know how to barter. You know, I'd rather do things where I can get some material, service, or whatever, than the money.
Well, again, thank you for a very good talk.
Yes.
That's the whole story. Sounded like it anyhow.
Oh, there's always a lot more. You know, as you talk, you think about a lot of things, you know. But
Okay, well, thank you very much.
thank you very much.
About it, I guess.
On the starboard side and port side, you were there to pick up the pilots that missed the ship.
Oh,
You
okay.
know, they were just learning to land and sea.
Yeah.
But the thing was, we never had much contact in New York and there with Navy aircraft because we were so well.